Dave Mason, when I talked to him a few months back, basically said that the British cats, like yourself, pretty much heard the blues, basically played your version of it and then repackaged it and sold it back to the States. Can you talk about that? Do you believe that that's an accurate assessment? I mean, he was being a little...
Well, it's an accurate assessment of what happened in the 60s. You know, it really has very little to do with what, you know, I've been doing, because, you know, I started playing the blues, you know, 10, 15 years before that happened in 63. So, you know, they're two different aspects, really. I didn't have a band together that I played publicly, but, you know, I was a devotee of jazz and blues and American music in general. So, you know, I would put a band together in art college and things like that. So, you know, I've always been involved in music from the age of 10 or 11 years old.
Can you talk about the first sounds of jazz? Because I didn't even know Jimmy Giuffre didn't play with a drummer. He had a drummerless quintet?
Yeah, quartet.
A quartet. So tell me where were you just getting it through records, or was there a...
you know, if you're a record collector, I think it applies to anybody who collects records. You know, you delve into the kind of music you like, and you build your collection accordingly.
Well, I understand that, but I'm saying, were you getting off on bebop? I mean, were Dizzy Gillespie? I want to.
Well, you're still talking way later. I'm talking about the 40s. You know,
you're in the 40s. You're in the 40s.
Yeah, that's when I started. You know, collecting records. 78 LPs weren't invented then, but you know, so.
So we're talking about the four brothers Woody Herman. Can we talk? I'm producing a documentary on Stan Getz. I'd love you to talk about that big band 40s era that Mayall was marinating in.
I don't know. It's a very big subject if you want to cover the history of jazz.
I mean, that's what my show's about, man. This isn't fluff.
Yeah.
So, I've been waiting to talk to you for months, man.
I guess you have. You got all these questions lined up. They're a little bewildering and overwhelming because of the scope of the question.
Well, I mean, listen, do I really want to talk to John Mayall about Eric Clapton? I could give a shit about that, okay? So let's talk about the real deal.
You know, when I first started collecting records, it was, you know, as an offshoot of my father's jazz record collection. So, you know, I grew up listening to this kind of music all my life. So his collection was more big bands, and because he played a little guitar, you know, he had a lot of focus on people like Eddie Lang and Lonnie Johnson and people like that, the Mills Brothers. So that was my early introduction to music, and then I went from there. When I discovered Boogie Woogie, it was you know, Albert Ammons, Pete Johnson, Cripple Clarence Loft, and all those guys, Jimmy Yancey. Those were my influences, and where I sparked off on my own. So we didn't have a piano, so I used to have to go to other people's houses and kind of torture them while I kind of worked out the rudiments of that, you know. So, so it was a hard slog, and there weren't very many people interested in listening to it because it was a bit archaic, and like I say, I was self-taught. So it was just one of those things, you know, that developed out of my own interest in music. I was playing for myself, really, until the 60s happened, and Alexis Corner and Cyril Davis made that kind of music palatable to a larger audience, and that kicked the whole thing off.
As to a layperson, a non-musician, and a journalist like myself, how did they stretch it to make it more palatable to a more pop or larger audience?
Well, it wasn't a pop audience. It was all the clubs in England were playing New Orleans trad jazz for 10 years. You know, Humphrey Littleton, Chris Barber, and Kenny Ball, and people like that. That was what was the most popular kind of music. And then when that had a 10 years run, Alexis and Cyril Davis came out of that clique, and you know, started putting the Blues Incorporated together. So that's how that all sparked off. And of course, it was a new generation, so they were attracted to this kind of music, and came from all different parts in the country, and that included myself coming from Manchester.
talking to John Mayall here. I'm just wondering about the live setting. I mean, you were hearing this stuff on 78s. Maybe you had a stacker up top of your head like Ernie Watts did going to sleep at night. You know, I mean, can you talk about a seminal? I mean, I didn't realize you were born in 1933. Is that accurate?
That's right, yes.
Okay, so you were born. You are. I mean. But I mean, you've been a bit fearless. But I mean, can you talk about a seminal live experience of seeing some of this jazz in England, or if there was even a local big band that mirrored that really?
It was all, you know. England's a very small country, so any band. I mean, London was the headquarters, really. With all the bands we used to travel in their vans up and down the country. So it was that kind of. It was just easily spread, you know. So it wasn't. It was mainly in the clubs, I would think, and there wasn't all that much activity in radio. But it was definitely a very thriving club industry all over the country, from top to bottom. So, well, you know, I caught all the jazz at the Philharmonic concerts that came over. So, I mean, I was exposed to, you know, meeting Art Blakey and countless jazz, Junior Mance, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, all those guys. You know, I met all those guys when they came over to England to do their tours.
This is now we're getting somewhere with John Mayall because, you know, I mean, Art Blakey's job, I was born in 1978. Blakey's job was to wash away the dust of everyday life when he would play for Cats. And can you just talk, John, I mean, very, very candidly, can you, because, you know, we live in an academic musical environment today. I don't know what it's like overseas, but you're in LA right now. I don't believe
that's where I live. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't really believe that the vocabulary within any genre of music can grow within the four walls of academia. And I wanted to talk to you because when you're putting Cats, like I've interviewed Larry Taylor twice, I've interviewed Ernie Watts, I've interviewed Charlie Owens. Rest in peace. I never got to Blue Mitchell. But you know what? When I see your bands, to me, it's a bunch of street scholars. It's cats that never learned, throw away the books, never had books. There were no jazz curriculums. It was an oral tradition, and you burned on the bandstand. You tell me about talk about that.
Well, that's the way it always has been. You know?
Not in today's. Maybe in your band, but there's a stagnation amongst all musics, and it has a lot to do with the fact that cats are now, if you can afford it, you pay $30,000 to go to school so you can learn some sort of theory or you can learn improvisation. John Mayall didn't learn improvisation in the four walls of a classroom.
No. I never learned to read or write music anyway, so I saw whatever. I just muscle along with what limited techniques I have. You know, I use it to the best of my ability.
But can you talk about the idea of seeing Art Blakey play live on the? I mean, just as for younger generations and cats like that, what was it that stood out to you?
Well, you know, I'd collected their records for years. You know, when you get an opportunity to see them live, and it's just a great experience. You know, so you know, people like Horace Silver and Wes Montgomery. I don't know, the list is pretty endless. They all came over to London and did their club tours, and all over Europe, you know. So,
you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. No. Well, I guess what I'm getting at is that even I talked to Larry Taylor, the great bass player, and that track we let in on, and we're going to get to in a minute because you don't realize this, but it's been my theme song. For quite some time, I think on Crusade Records, which was a label that you started, I believe. But the jazz was right alongside the blues in the 1950s. And
well, yeah, it always has been. You know, you can't separate the blues from jazz because jazz grew out of the blues and work songs and things like that. It's an African American form of music, you know, so it all came out of one source.
How do you know it was an African source?
Well, you just read any history book of jazz, spirituals and work songs, prison songs. It all starts somewhere. Then recorded music came in, so nobody really knows what the scene or what kind of music was before recorded music. But it's a long tradition. It goes back a couple of centuries.
When you would see cats like Junior Mance, Blakey, Horace Silver, it seemed. This was part of the Norman Granz contingent, Jazz at the Philharmonic. I didn't know Blakey was part of that group.
Well, that was some shows were dealt with by Norman Granz, but promoters in England, they would get American jazz stars and do them independently. So there was plenty going on.
Can you, John? Can you talk a little bit about the first band you were in where you felt like your ears really grew the most?
I've every band that I've put together, I've enjoyed playing, and I've learned something from it. So.
No, but I asked you the first time that your ears grew the most, when someone stretched you out and you started to hear things in the music in a specific time in your career.
Well, I don't know. I've always, I've never worked in another person's band, so I don't really know how to answer that. I've just progressed in my own way to play the music that I feel.
Can you talk about how you met Blue Mitchell?
Well, I wanted to put a jazz blues fusion thing together, and living in England, you could perhaps find a trumpet player who played like Blue Mitchell, to have in your band. But of course, coming to America then and moving here, then you had access to the real thing. So you didn't have to find somebody who sounded like someone. You could just give them a call and see if they were interested. So that's how Blue came into the picture. So same with Red Holloway and Freddy Robinson, and Victor Gaskin, and I could get their phone numbers and ask them if they wanted the gig. So that's how it all came about, and that's how it always is.
Well, I mean, don't be so modest, man. I mean, there was no more of a burning band. I mean, you're putting together Keith Hartley with a horn section. I guess, can you just talk? I mean, we just talked about jazz came out of the blues, but then you're talking about coming to the States and saying, I want to do a jazz blues fusion, which was actually one of your albums along with Movie.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Can you expand on that for this worldwide audience? Because you just said that jazz came out of it. So when you're talking about jazz blues, I just want you to riff on that.
Well, it's just a free form. My band was just a free form thing. There were very little charts or anything like that because we didn't need them. So it was a great blowing experience. So we had a lot of fun.
That's all you're going to give me?
Well, I don't know what else to say. I put a band together so that we can explore each other's music and enjoy ourselves and make the audience a part of that. So that's what I've always done.
Right, but you took cats that were prolific studio musicians. I mean, Blue Mitchell, Ernie Watts, those guys could read flypaper. So can you put me inside those sessions? I mean, this is, to me, is incredibly. There's nothing going on like this in today's world, John. Nothing.
Well, it's up to band leader to choose a musician he wants to work with. So, like you say, there aren't many people who do that, So, I guess I might be the only one. I'm not sure.
Sure. Why ultimately did you decide to come to the United States? And can you talk about your experience coming over here as an immigrant and who really took care of you? Obviously, we're having very different issues today as it relates to immigration in this country. Europe is having its own problems. But I'd just like you to talk about who took you under your wing when you first moved to the States.
I can't really remember. I came over in the beginning of '68 to do our first American tour, such as it was. It was 2 weeks in New York at the Cafe A Go-Go, one night in Detroit, and a week at the Whisky A Go-Go in Los Angeles, and a couple of weekends in the Fillmore in San Francisco. So that was my first introduction to the States, and I could tell instantly that it was a way of life that was more suited to what I wanted out of life. So, having been brought up on American movies, American music, American culture, I just recognized that it was a place for home for me. So within the year, I moved out here, and I've been here ever since.
Were you surprised at the lack of appreciation for African American music in the States?
No, not really, because you got the color bar here, and you had separate societies. Black and white did not mix. So that's part of America's heritage. That fortunately it's changed now. So we're not living in those dark days of the last century and the early part of last century, the 20th century.
Well, are we talking about when you came over here?
We're talking about Black America was different from white America. They're two separate societies, so they didn't mix. So that when the American jazz and blues people came over to do a tour from 1920s onwards, they were totally revered. They were treated like gods over in Europe because they'd followed their music through records, and the color bar didn't exist. So they found a very warm welcome, and that's helped to spread the opportunity for us to hear these people who were legends to us to interact with them and see them live. So that was a great thing.